Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another Rising Tide Talk. I am Matt, Roleplay Chat Capelli, and today we are here to talk about project management for the new tabletop RPG creator. And today I am joined by someone who is an industry expert in the TTRPG space. She is an IT professional by day and a TTRPG game designer, writer, and project manager by night. Please join me in welcoming Lyla Jar of Eyes Fujiwara to our interview today.
Hi. I guess that was a great introduction. I can say like, a few things about me. So, the one thing I will say, and hopefully this is not my imposter syndrome coming out the gate, and hopefully this is an inspiring thing, is I actually started in the TTRPG space like a little over a year ago, or maybe almost exactly a year ago.
Awesome.
So, I do have a, storied professional career before I was doing TTRPG stuff, which obviously like influences a lot of the ways that I show up in the TTRPG space and I run projects. But yeah, I'm new, and I think that so I sort of know a little bit about what it's like to be trying to hustle in 2022, 2023, getting into TTRPGs. I also have done a little bit of freelance writing, and I am designing games myself. The biggest game that I'm making right now is a game called Jukebox, which involves singing karaoke during the game and is a homage to Broadway musicals.
Love it. I love it. My singing voice isn't so hot, but I still belt out the music. So yeah, that sounds a lot of fun. And Lila, I think that's super motivational to know that yeah, people can make it. Like you can still make it and have the day job and kind of doing that hustle and that balance. It's tough. I mean, I think a lot of us do that in the Rising Tide community. So it's nice to hear it coming from someone like you.
Sorry, I'm also just going to say something really quickly. I'm actually not working a day job right now, which might
Oh
have.
my goodness, I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're totally fine. I think that there was a couple of panels that I was on, and it's always really interesting to see kind of who is doing it in their off hours, like what else is on people's schedules, and whether they're doing it as a full-time thing or as a part-time thing or as a hobby. And the tabletop space sort of spans the gamut from that. So we can get into that if it makes sense at some point. But yeah.
Yeah, well, now I'm embarrassed. I'm sorry for making that little
You
goof.
did a great job like sharing the introduction for this. I just want to say that like Matt was very prepared for the project management talk. Yeah, no, that's totally on me. I probably missed something in there. So
Cool, cool, cool. No, it's definitely not on you. I try to keep the intro secret because I like to like surprise people with it. But anyway, let's talk about project management in TTRPG. So today, Lila, I'm really excited to talk to you about this because it's something that I do in my day job as well. Or I mean, I do in my day job and you do now in your day job, which is as a TTRPG creator. And I'm hoping to split our conversation into three main pillars. We're going to start with definitions and the importance of project management. Then we're going to segue into kind of the big pillars of project management, things like scheduling and creating charters and budgets and that kind of stuff. And then the last piece will be where we talk about tools and resources for, helping us get started. So let's roll right into it. And I'll ask you, maybe it's a softball, maybe it's not, depending on how you look at it. But I'd like to ask you, what is project management? How would you define it, especially in the context of being a tabletop RPG content creator?
yeah, totally. I was looking over these questions and thinking about how I would answer this. I'm gonna wing it a little bit. I think one of the pieces of context that I can bring is that I've seen the title of project manager, producer, and like project lead. And I think that there's a lot of sort of overlap, I guess, in the TTRPG space of those things. Producer and project manager in particular, like you could be doing the same things and it could be called one or the other. My uninformed take is that producer sounds a little bit nicer. So sometimes like people will just take the title if they can. I think a project lead generally denotes that you might be having a little bit more creative or like vision oversight on things. And I'm hoping that this conversation today can actually be sort of about both, like both how do you do project management and like a project leadership sort of role. Project management in particular, though, is sort of the set of skills that are the operational and sort of facilitation based skills that you need to get a project out the door. It's a lot about scheduling and running meetings and tracking tasks, providing code of conducts and helping people when like you're the one who's going to be putting out the fires. You're the one that's going to be holding people accountable for things. We'll get into, I'm sure, like actionable stuff around all of that, but it is that particular set of skills of coordinating people and coordinating also. I mean, people are involved in all steps of the project, but coordinating all of the little bits of work and making sure that everything is moving along so that at the end of the day, a book gets, published as a PDF or possibly as a, hardcover book.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more with that definition. And I think that blending of being involved creatively, I think especially in the TTRPG space, there's folks that want to do that. And I think if you don't want to just be the person doing the schedule and holding people accountable, that doesn't sound super fun to you because you want to write a part of the rules or whatever. Yeah, have at it. I don't think they're definitely not mutually exclusive as long as you have the capacity to do it, right?
So when you're just starting out, I think in a lot of cases you're going to be making your own opportunities, and you'll also see this for creators that start to get a little bit bigger. If you start to get a little bit bigger and you start to get a bit more in the space, you're going to meet people. And you're going to want to work with those people. And in working with those people, there's going to need to be some amount of coordination and facilitation and like running a team. And, whether it is a super defined thing, which I think is a little bit better, or somebody kind of, falls into that role, you're going to need to be having somebody fulfilling those project management skills. So I think a lot of the time, like the reason that I was doing project management was because I wanted to make a book, and I don't have, thousands of dollars to contract somebody out to project manage for me. I have those skills, and so I did it. And the message that I want to give is that like it's not that hard to do it, or there's at least templates and structure and ways that you can think about things where I want to empower people basically to be able to run their own projects. So certainly there's a version of this where like, I've applied and in the process of doing like TTRPG project management jobs, and that is a skill set that is sought after. But also if you have this idea that you want to put out in the world, like part of that is having the organizational skills to bring it all together. And I wanted to empower people to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of already answered my second question, Lila. So I'll ask it again in case there's a little more you want to add.
Mhm.
But essentially, I'm curious to know for folks in the TTRPG space, why should we consider project management skills and processes
Yeah.
within the confines of what we're doing? And I really liked what you just said about how, sometimes you don't necessarily have the resources and we want to work with other people, but we need somebody to be the one spearheading something and taking charge and coordinating. So I think that definitely fits into there. Was there more that you wanted to add with regards to that?
Yeah, so I noted two things on here. So one, like you can project manage yourself. Like it is possible that if you're trying to put something out into the world, that you will thrive better if you make a schedule for yourself and you try to hit those deadlines and things. When you get other people involved, I think for them to have a good time, it starts to become more pertinent that somebody is fulfilling that role. A lot of project management is writing down the shared expectations that you all have about how work is going to get done. Like a schedule is expectations, it is time expectations. A template for what you're writing is expectations. It's expectations about a format. So if you don't have those expectations, that can lead to situations where people have just wildly different, ideas of what they're actually writing or when their actual due dates are, and can lead to, a lot of unhappiness, I guess. So as soon as you start involving other people, like somebody's going to need to lead and somebody's going to need to be clear about things and what's going on. So definitely, I think you need somebody that's filling that role when you have a group. I guess the other thing that, I'm sort of going around with that is when projects have defined constraints, either because you as a person want to give them some sort of constraint or there's like external constraints. So for example, if you're going to spend some money on it and you have a budget, that is a constraint. And therefore you need to like figure out how you're going to work within that constraint and coordinate a bunch of people to match that constraint. For example, maybe you have an art budget. Like you're going to need to do some project management if you have 3 different artists to figure out how much you're paying everybody and what you're actually commissioning to get that done. So I was trying to think about like what projects don't need project management, and it's in my mind it's a project where or a thing that you're doing that maybe doesn't really have particularly strong constraints on it. So if you're working alone and you're kind of just like vibing and feeling out what you want to make, that might not necessarily be the time that you need to write, a budget or like a strict schedule for something. But as soon as the realities of like time, money, people's responsibilities, start coming into it, then I think that you need to start thinking about project management.
Yeah, super well said. Couldn't agree more. I think in most cases, a project will have one of those three things. If you're collaborating with somebody else or you have a timeline and you're targeting getting something out by a certain date, having a schedule isn't going to hurt. having some timelines isn't going to hurt. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, Lila. I have one other question for you with regards to kind of the importance of project management. It's a bit tricky to answer, so it's okay if if you're not too sure what to say in this case. But not too long ago, the Rising Tide community had Ashley Warren, the director of the Storytelling Collective, join us, and the discussion was about creating a creative process for yourself. In summary, it was kind of defined as this process that would walk you through the creative elements of working on and then delivering your creative projects, whether that be a TTRPG book or a map pack or whatever. And I think there is definitely some overlap going on between the TTRPG project management space and this creative process. And I just wanted to hear from your perspective, what kind of relationship do you feel like exists between a creative process and then following project management principles, if any, and maybe where do they differ, if there are differences, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting because like I've been part of like a couple of panel discussions, and people talk about how like potentially creatives work like very different from other fields possibly. I don't know how much I necessarily buy into that. I mean, there is an ineffable thing that you're doing a lot of the time, which if you're designing a computer program, it's like, does it work? And if you're designing a game, it's like, is it fun? And is it fun in some sense? Or like, is the game working? Or, have I delivered on this sort of more amorphous thing? I guess can be like possibly a little bit harder to define. But I mean, we could get into like, talking about goals and like playtesting and stuff, but I think there are, ways to do that. Project management, again, is kind of much more in the realm of constraints. And I don't know whether the creative process stuff talked about having constraints. It might, because in some ways having constraints is helpful for being creative. Like having a goal or something in mind or what you're trying to hit can be really helpful for like funneling a creative vision. But project management very much is like, do I know what my word count is? Do I know what my cost is going to be? Do I know what schedule I'm on? Do I know the happiness of my team? Do I know and like what will make them happy? Do I have templates and like style guides and things for people? So I don't know if she talked about all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it from what my memory serves, and it's not great these days, but from what I remember, it was. I think you're touching on something important here. I think the creative process seemed like a more personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was something that you do for yourself. I'm sure it could involve other people, but I think where we can maybe draw the line is that creative process might not include things like coordinating and organizing other people's time. That's kind of where the project management stuff might come into play.
Yeah.
But there's definitely like these two things live in the same world. There's no doubt about it in my mind.
So I'm like onboarding to a project right now, and I was recently in an interview for a project manager position. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that one of the things that I've heard is it's like very hard to hold yourself accountable sometimes. If you're really trying to divide up like creative work versus like the very project management oriented work, it's sometimes hard for somebody who's trying to be like creative, who is beholden to whatever their brain chemistry is and whether inspiration strikes and that sort of stuff, to also be the one that is really keeping track of things like the schedule and the word counts and stuff. That is something that I heard from people is like, it's really hard for me to be both the person that's like making the material and also kind of like policing myself around how much time I'm giving myself for things. Because if I'm the one who's trying to hold myself accountable for the constraints on me, like I always might give myself a little bit, more time. So I think that is sometimes why teams will split up the person who is kind of holding somebody accountable versus the person who is actually accountable for doing the work. And in TTRPGs, a lot of times that split can be a person who's doing creative stuff versus like the one who's more focused on big picture, unblocking people and getting stuff out the door. Yeah. So I think that sometimes happens, but it can also be the case where you're
Yeah.
trying to do both. So
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. So I think that gives folks listening a pretty good foundation, at least, of, when we talk about project management in the context of what we do, that's kind of what we mean. So now let's move on to talk a little bit more about concrete pillars, deliverables that come out of the project management process. I don't know if the folks in the Rising Tide community know this about me, but I'm a government employee up in Canada, and my day job is to lead projects most of the time. Not TTRPG projects. I much rather be leading TTRPG projects, but I'm leading like policy work and stuff like that. And in the projects that I've led, there's always these foundational documents, we call them. And I don't want to get too much into the verbiage, but there's these documents that act as like the skeleton of a project. So without getting too much into the verbiage that project managers use, we have things like charters, risk matrices, risk logs, project schedules, yada, yada, yada. So I'm hoping in this pillar, Lyla, we can kind of talk about some of those things, demystify them a little bit, and see, how we can apply them in the TTRPG context. So I guess the first question that I'll ask you, and we don't necessarily have to dig too deep into each of them, but which of these foundational documents do you feel like are the most valuable to talk about in this forum, or the ones that you've used that you've found to be the most useful?
yeah, so I'm going to mention some stuff that's like, I think, broader to all projects, and then some stuff that's TTRPG specific. So the first thing is I will do a shameless plug now because the version of me that wrote like a blog post about it like was thinking and like ordered it much more nicely than probably what I'm about to say right now. But I run a blog over on Substack, Jar of Eyes. It has a project management series. Possibly one of the mods is going to be dropping the link in right now. But one of the posts that I did was about making a project plan, and it hits on at least some of the stuff that I'm going to mention right now, and we'll go into more depth. And if you're not taking notes, you can go there. So before this conversation, I kind of jotted out the things that I think are like very important that every project can have, and I'll try to make like a case for why I think you should do all of these things. And then I did sort of like a secondary tier of things that you could consider based off of the project that you're organizing, the size, what kind of difficulties or challenges it might be dealing with. This is following a lot of what I said in the project plan post, but one of the things that I like doing is starting off with like goals for your project. What I say is that you should do somewhere between like 3 to 5, like try not to, make 20 different goals kind of thing. Actionable, clear goals for what you're trying to do with your project. You want to have these because they can be kind of like your little elevator pitch for anybody that you're talking to about what you're building and what you're trying to do. But also, as you're making decisions about things, you can go back to those goals and go like, hey, is the decision I'm making actually like fitting with the goals that I have for this project or not? And those goals could be around gameplay stuff, like a way that it might make somebody feel. Yeah, success metrics, I see. It could be or it could be even more like specific and measurable stuff. So, one of the things that they really drilled in when I was at Google was like trying to find measurable goals. So some of the most measurable stuff could be like, I sell 50 copies. Like that is very binary. And for one of like the first project I organized, I did have a goal like that. I think it was like, I want to sell 100 copies kind of thing. And when I brought people on board, they all knew that. And that was like a thing in the back of everybody's mind, as that was like a concrete goal that we were all going towards. And we had decisions that we made around like splitting up promotion that drove us towards that goal. And we spent some time on that because we were trying to hit that goal. I've also had goals around, one of the goals of my initial project was that people would have a good time on the project and would want to work with me again. And as like nerdy as it sounds, during the project and at the end of the project, I sent out like a survey, which was basically like, how much like did you have a good time on this project, would you do this again, knowing kind of what now sort of things. I split up each of the different sections that we had like working on it and got people's kind of like happiness scores for that. So even things that seem like a little bit ephemeral like can be measured. And so you can have both sides of it. You make the goal, you decide where you're going towards, you have an idea of how you're going to confirm that you've hit the goal. Like that's a very important thing, is to know how you're going to measure it. And then, you have the other side where you do measure it with, in the happiness case, like I was doing a survey kind of thing. Okay, so that's number one.
Yeah, yeah. Can I interject real quick? I don't want you to lose your train of thought. I don't know if you did it on purpose or not, but having like a post-mortem evaluation like that is super project managing.
Yeah.
Like that is part of the that's like part of the cycle, right? It's like you get through it, and then when you're done, you learn from it so that you can apply that next time. So I don't know if that was intentional, but
No, I mean it's totally like we kind of I think that they have developed slightly different terms. So at Google, so post-mortem is a document that you make. Usually it presumes that something bad happened.
okay.
Well, it's like the guy's dead. Like, why is he dead? And in this case, the guy is the project, and you go through a kind of autopsy of what happened on the project that got it there. In Google, they give it a slightly nicer term. They call it a retrospective. But basically, at the end of the project, right after you finished it, so everybody is both like really hyped about the things that were hype, really remembers the things that were painful. You get everybody together and you ask, what went well on this project? Like what did we do that was really good? What did not go so well on this project? And then looking at the what did not go so well on this project, what are we going to do the next time around so that for each of these things that we said did not go well, like something different will happen. Like what could we have done if we had known this, in the past? So I freaking love that. I have used this as a individual worker sometimes as a kind of proactive way to show the people that I'm working with that I'm trying to get better. So I just think it's a really interesting way that you can reframe when you might think that certain parts of the project didn't go so well. So instead of ignoring it and not talking about it and trying to pretend that it didn't happen, it's a very actionable way to be like, do the cheesy thing where you're like, I'm going to turn my failure into a success, or I'm going to fail forward kind of thing. And as somebody who is a bit of a perfectionist and has a hard time just sitting with having failed at something, it's a very empowering thing to be like, this is not a failure. This is actually something that I can learn from. And the next time I'm going to do this right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, or having had interrupted you. You talked about setting goals. Are there maybe one, if you have one or two more really quick?
I'll list them off very quickly, and then if the audience is interested, we can go more into them. So I think we've listed two.
Totally.
Like a goals doc. The other one, or a section of your doc for goals. The other one is we just talked about retrospectives. I think retrospectives are a good tool to have in your box for things that you could do. Okay, roles and responsibilities. I think we're going to talk about it more later, but it's essentially like who is responsible for what on the project.
Totally.
A schedule.
Yeah.
When do these people who are responsible for things need to get stuff done by? A code of conduct. A code of conduct is a document that you provide to people about how you're going to treat each other on a team. Their alpha stream, Teos, I don't remember his last name, but it's like LinkedIn, has provided a free code of conduct specifically for TTRPG projects. He did all the hard work of molding it specifically for like a group of people working together, and I have taken that and like modified it for my own purposes and provided it to people. I know I'm going on a little bit more about this, but I think it's very, without getting too much into it, like I've and I said this in my blog post, like I've had a lot of friends who have really had terrible work experiences because somebody in leadership did not, do something when there was a really bad like interpersonal thing going on. And it's a goal of mine, and I hope a goal of all of yours, that doesn't happen to folks on your team. So one of the like prevention and also like helpful things you can do is provide something which says, hey, this is clearly like stuff that's unacceptable. And also, if you find yourself in a situation, here's a very clear list of steps. So you don't have to be guessing whether like I'm going to show up for you as a lead if something bad happens on, the team. Code of conduct, very important. Happy to chat more about that if people would like. Okay, some way to track tasks. So like whether, has this thing been done or not?
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, a discussion of money. How much are you going to be charging for this? Like what's the incoming money situation? Are you doing a Kickstarter? And then also, what are expectations around how people are getting paid?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a perfect checklist there. I'm sure it's in your Substack already, but for people listening, that's the short and fast of it, I think. But yeah, let's dive a little bit more into some of these these tools that we talked about that you're bringing up, Lila, I think the first one that came to mind to me when I thought of tools was a project schedule. For people who might be unfamiliar with creating something like that,
Mhm.
what kind of advice would you give them to kind of get started and build one that will be successful, that will
Yeah.
meet their target deadlines and stuff like that?
Yeah, totally. Okay, so the first thing I will say is specific to TTRPGs, to the extent that you can, I think it is wise before organizing a group project to make something yourself first. Because what that's going to do is you are going to, yourself have gone through all the steps of the process. You're going to know what writing is like. You're going to know what editing is like, what, layout is like. You're going to have some idea. You'll know what the steps are because part of like creating a schedule is what are actually all the tasks that need to be done. And that can sometimes be very hard to, guess if you haven't done it. It is possible. You can talk to other people. You can, do research and stuff to try to figure out what the steps are. But I think with TTRPGs, you can make like a one-page like encounter or even like a little one-page game and put it out there, and suddenly you know what the steps are and you have a little bit of an idea of like time, like how much time is spent on these things. The other thing that, or the other things that I will say, one is that I think you should think of a schedule not as something that you create and then you show to everybody, you go, all right, this is what we're doing, you all got to do it kind of thing. It is a conversation where the people that you're working into in a good way should have like some sort of buy-in to it and should feel like they have sort of a say in the schedule. And practically what that means is that I think one way that you can handle this is you make a draft schedule, but then you go and you chat with people, possibly one-on-one, to say like, hey, does this work for you? That is one of the things that I did for encounters. Like before signing on, I actually had one-on-one conversations with everybody and I like walked them through the schedule and I said like, hey, do you have any vacations that are like fall in here? Is there anything that I should know about, that would mean that this would be, hard for you, or are there accommodations that we can make, for you up front? Sometimes instead of saying this is when it's due, you go, hey, when can you get this done? And that makes the relationship a lot more like kind of peers, I guess. And you're a lot more likely to sort of have like buy-in and good vibes and a certain amount of accountability if they, sort of set their deadline and you're helping them hit that deadline. And then I sort of mentioned it, but just make sure during that conversation that you're proactively asking if, thinking about holidays, thinking about if somebody's going on vacation, any of these other things that might be like kind of risks, like just try to get that down and understand what your options are if, any of those things hit. And then finally, like, we are all humans with, frail bodies and things that come up and kids and, etc. So to that, one of the most important things that you, when you're just meeting somebody and you're working with them for the first time, if you're, project managing for them, with them, is that you want to develop like very open lines of communication. One way to do that is just to be very clear about what should happen if something comes up. Like part of my project plan, I think, has like a couple sentences of like, it's okay, things fall behind, like here are the ways that you can reach out to me, like here's what you should do if you find yourself falling behind, and say that to people, because it's going to be much better for you if the situation you don't want is somebody panicking, knowing that they're not going to get it done, or feeling like they need to pull some crazy, unhealthy, all-nighters and get completely burned out, when in reality they could have just had a conversation with you and you would have been able to, fix it and work it out or grab other people in. So that's one of the things that's like contingent on leaders to be accessible enough that people feel comfortable coming to you and having those conversations. So very easy, first step is to just like say a process for how to get a hold of you and encourage people to get a hold of you. In the project plan blog post, I write out a sort of calculation for calculating how many words like people could be expected to write in a day for TTRPG work. So I have a little bit of it down here, but basically a professional is expected to write 1,000 to 1,200 words a day. Publishable words, meaning that it's not junk that needs to be like completely deleted and like re-edited the next day. Again, that is a professional. When you're just starting out, most of you are not going to be operating. Well, first of all, you're not going to be operating at that speed. And second of all, you're not going to have 8 hours a day from your freelancers, most likely, where they're, unless you were compensating them really well, where they're like solely focusing on your project. So there's going to be a lot of division. I think so for example, for encounters, which was 500 to 750 words, I gave people 18 days to write. Because again, I'm assuming that people are not writing every single day. And when they do write, they might be sitting down for like 2 hours, sort of thing.
Mhm.
So my numbers are all in the blog posts, but for both writing and editing, I think a lot of times people think of things in terms of number of words written or number of words edited and like a speed at which you can do that by.
Yeah.
So that's one way, at least for those two tasks, you can do that.
Yeah, I think that's a super valuable metric to have, like something quantifiable like that. I really like too how you talked about being accessible as the leader, as the coordinator of the project. And I don't think you explicitly said it, but one piece of advice that was given to me, I think it applies to TTRPG projects, was that to always build Slack into your schedule.
Yeah.
Always put time that, like, if you think it's going to take this much time, just add a little more, because you, like you were saying,
Mhm.
inevitabilities occur, things happen, people get sick, people's kids get sick, accidents happen. You don't want your timelines to be so strict that you can't recover from an accident if something were to happen.
Yeah, 100%. And I actually want to say something that a mentor told me when we were talking about that. So I was writing this little zine guide that I can talk about later, and talking about planning out schedules. And I was like, add buffer. I think I said secretly add buffer.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, you have wiggle room, but you don't let them know it's there.
Let me say something, because I put the word in secret there without really thinking too strongly on it. And I was talking over it with a mentor who had done like a lot more, and I'm going like, is the process for kind of planning this out seem correct for a schedule? And the thing he told me, which I think was very wise and got really anal on this word secret, is he's like, don't be secret about it.
Oh, interesting.
Let people know that you have built in some buffer, because that's one of the ways that you create trust with your team. Like, you've actually like planned ahead to be able to accommodate if something goes up. Like, if somebody gets sick and they know that there's like a little bit of buffer in the schedule, they're more likely to come to you to work that out. I think there's like a little bit of a sort of unfortunate like lack of trust or something that I had when I
Mhm.
used that word secret. And in a perfect world, and one of the things we can talk about is like thinking about how you put together teams. Like, you want to get a real solid team of people that you have like high trust with, where you don't have to like hide the fact, where you're all kind of on the same page about things, and you don't have to like secretly put in a few extra weeks so you can be like, my trump card, like, yeah. Chat comment is great, as to do both.
Yeah, that's great advice. I'm looking at the clock, and I'm also looking at the RT discussions chat where people
Mhm.
can post their questions, and questions are piling up there, which is great. So I'm gonna try to zoom a little faster here, Lila, if you're comfortable with
I will
that.
try to stop things. Yeah, let's go.
No, no, but I mean everything you're saying is gold, so don't stop. You're doing great. I'm gonna try to stop interjecting as much. You talked a little bit about roles and responsibilities and like a work breakdown structure. Can you tell us, in the TTRPG projects that you've been in,
Mhm.
what kind of roles do you find to be the most successful, and how does that affect the way that you kind of establish your roles and responsibilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so when you're just starting out, it's going to be hard to get everybody to fill the fancy roles that you have on
Mm,
a project. So I made this little zine, which we can talk about later, but I actually like had this page, which is like, here are the roles, you might get.
that's so cool.
So in there, there's writers, there's editors. Writing can be divided up into different types of writers. Editors can be divided up into different types of editors. You got art, and that can be divided up into people who are doing like art directing and interior and cover artists, cartographers that are making maps, graphic designers that are doing like the layout for, what you're doing. Yeah, then there's, I had on here like getting somebody to do marketing and that kind of stuff for you. So maybe I don't have a hard and fast rule necessarily for like who you should be, seeking. I definitely think that somebody's going to need to do project management, and that might end up
Hmm.
being you as like a lead writer. I will also say, so for my RPG jukebox that I'm working on, the things that I decided to spend money on or like get, team members for were a developmental editor and a cover artist. So that speaks like a little bit to, kind of what I felt was like important for that project. For encounters, we did a sort of funky thing, which I'm not sure I would do next time, which is that we just had a team of writers and then everybody also had editing responsibilities. That there were some nice things about that, but there was also a deep realization of why having a single editor is actually like a very nice thing if you can find somebody to do editing for you.
Was it like a too many chefs in the kitchen kind of scenario, or?
Yeah, so like I proactively provided some tooling to try to like help with it. So we had a style guide and I had an editing checklist. I'm actually writing the blog post up about both of those things. But, it's the role of an editor, having a single editor just means that editing is consistent. Like you're one of the steps of editing is trying to get everything to kind of be to a consistent quality level. And that's frankly just a lot easier to do when you
Mhm.
have like a single sort of senior editor who's, doing the whole thing. I will also say that one of the things that I lucked out with was I invited Taylor Navarro to my project, who is now like a good friend of mine, and she somewhat organically stepped up into that role, and it saved my butt. Like it was so clear, the good that she was doing on that project.
Yeah.
So if I in the future, like editing has just become one of the top things that I would look for.
Totally, totally. All right, sweet. Let's ask one more question for me
Mhm.
before we move on to resources, which you've been very kindly doling out already as we've been talking. Let's talk a little bit about money. I think, TTRPG creators, like all creators, deserve to get paid for their work. And you have some fantastic articles on your Substack about dividing up money and the kind of lessons you've learned in in dealing with your projects with regards to how to compensate people for their contributions. I'd love to hear, if you don't mind, a summary of what those lessons might be.
Yeah, totally. And so basically I blogged about it and then this zine and some of the work about it was like a little bit more information that I had, kind of after I wrote it. So there might be other options out there, but I'll try to remember kind of like the different options that you have. So you can pay people up front, like by word. It's usually by word, I think, for
Mm-hmm.
writers and editors, although, you can do whatever you want if you're leading the project. But that's sort of like a standard. I will say that the word rate, so in general, I think there's been a sort of movement to try to make sure that writers are getting paid at least 10 cents a word. And even that is like, if you extrapolate out the numbers, Teos, who made the code of conduct, has a bunch of other great resources. One of them was like just going through the math of it. You have to be, yourself producing, I think, multiple hardcover like wizard books a year, like Wizards of the Coast books a year, to be making like minimum wage or like a good wage in TTRPGs if you're writing at 10 cents a word, I think it was. So I will say a small, soapbox, like in general, I think it is becoming frowned upon to pay people less than 10 cents a word just because it's, kind of ringing.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think of a different word besides abusive, but it's not, yeah, there's just some stuff with it where it's like people's work has to be, worth a certain amount. The other side of the coin, though, and this again was talking with one of the same mentor who I was talking about the scheduling stuff, is that when you're new, it can be really hard to pay per word. And royalty shares is, I think, another way where, things will be fair at least because, like, at least nobody will be making money, which I know is not a particularly inspiring message. I I've had a lot of thoughts about I mean, and I guess the other reality is like the first thing that you publish is probably not going to, make you a huge amount of money. I will give I suppose a somewhat of a harsh truth. So this project that I worked on or that I led, Encounters in the Radiant Citadel, it's a Electrum bestseller, which definitely puts it in the top 10% of books that are sold on the DM's Guild. We had 10 writers on it and we split, I think we were charging like $4.99 for very specific reasons, which I actually get into in the money talk about trying to like game the system a little bit. like overall, Electrum is like 250 plus sales, which on one hand it's like cool.
Hmm.
People who are not my like direct blood relatives have like bought this book. That's really neat. And then on the other end of it, when you publish to DM's Guild, they take 50% of your profits. And I was splitting it. I made an agreement to like split it up amongst 10 people. So like at the end of the day, I haven't looked at it, but it's, I made like $100. And this was like a month plus of,
Hmm.
very hard work on my part organizing all this stuff. So you got to think about why you're doing things. I did not do that project to make thousands of dollars off of it. I do think that there are potentially some ways, although maybe not publishing to DM's Guild, where you can, turn a profit. But I was not running things in a way that would necessarily do that. I had new authors, like the place that we published to was taking 50% of the cuts, like et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But, one of the things that I was doing is I'm basically providing an education for myself about how to, run a project. And
Hmm.
I'm meeting all these people. And honestly, the social connections that I got from that, which was definitely a thing that I was thinking about going into it, are just so meaningful to me. Like, good friends with someone on our project. And I don't know, it's kind of weird to talk about that, but there were like the way that I got connected to mentorship was through doing some of those early organizations because I did those well. And then people knew about me and they had a good experience with me. And then, I got connected to folks who actually, some of my first freelancing gigs were sort of through that. So I think there's some different ways that you can think about it. The blog posts divide up the common places that people publish things. So like Itch, DM's Guild, Drive Through RPG. I'm just getting into like looking at Kickstarters. There's like a case for crowdfunding, definitely. And I have deep thoughts about all of this, but I also want to make sure to get to audience questions. So there's a blog post telling you about why your art is worth money, and please don't give stuff away for free. There's a blog post that kind of breaks down the different marketplaces and some considerations for them, and then there's the final blog post is some templates and stuff to if you want to do royalty splits that will just like calculate those out for you. Again, I think that's a great option for somebody who's running things full time, and it links out to the Unbreakable charter. Unbreakable was a big collaboration that was done with a bunch of Asian creators where they like put basically percentages based off of like the jobs that different people were doing that they were going to get paid for things. So if you want something that feels like a little bit more objective or like somebody else did it, you can just refer to that and organize money around that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So yeah, I think we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to get to audience questions. I know there was supposed to be a third pillar about resources, but I think as we were talking, you mentioned quite a few. I think your Substack is definitely a great place for people to start. And then, of course, we could always try to provide other resources through discussions here on the Rising Tide Discord community. So if folks feel like they need more help with that, let us know, and I can try to field that. But yeah, let's go to the questions from the audience. So if you're here live tonight, the questions are being posted in the RT Discussions text chat. And keeping in mind that we only have about 10 minutes left, I'm going to go through the questions, and Lyla, you can do your best.
If I can't answer it, I'm just going to say it and we'll try to get a better answer later.
Perfect, perfect. So the first question is from Tom, the GMM cast. And Tom asks, what are some of the best methods for getting yourself to actually, quote unquote, do the thing, taking that first step?
Oh man. Okay, so this doesn't seem to be necessarily like project management related. Well, I think one of the best things that you can do, so accountability is part of this question. Tell somebody that you're going to do it, maybe get an accountability buddy, figure out some way that you can make a schedule for yourself and have somebody who's like, trying to encourage you to do that. It doesn't have to be a person that you hire. It could be a spouse or a friend.
Mm.
There are folks in your life that can do that. The other thing is start small. Like you are going to get a dopamine, serotonin, like good chemicals in your brain when you get the thing out into the world, or at least I do. One of the things that I know, actually, here's a tip: schedule a playtest. That has actually helped me a lot. Don't have a thing yet, but I schedule a play test for it. I got 4 people showing up. I gotta have something ready for them. So that's my hot tip.
Definitely.
And then like that'll help you like cut down all the crap and just try to get something that you can do in 4 hours. Show run. This works for a DM's Guild adventure. It doesn't need to be pretty and everything, but you'll be able to run it, and then you might be able to get some excitement and energy out of how folks are reacting to flesh it out more.
Super. Yeah. I'll also plug something else that we've done on the Rising Tide community. Not too long ago, we talked to Matthew from Abyssal Brews, and Matthew, the whole point of that conversation was to fail more often.
Mhm.
And in that discussion, we talk about getting over the fear of failure and kind of how that can help. So definitely check out that discussion in podcast form if you can. Let's go on to the next question. This was also from Tom. Tom asks, you mentioned meeting cool people that you want to work with. Any advice for meeting people in the space you might admire or look up to and interacting in a peer-to-peer context rather than a fan to creator context?
Yeah. So I've been on a lot of like panel discussions about things. So one of the tips, which is definitely something that I did, was think about who are your actual peers. Hopefully, like the series that I'm writing is about how you can coordinate a group of your peers to sort of come up together.
Mm.
And I have seen, because I'm getting some mentorship, basically like a group of people who did this and are, it really worked out for them. The connections that they made, learning how to write, to edit, and to produce stuff together. They create a really strong team of people, and one person got their foot through the door that like got everybody through the door. And that's sort of what happened with me. In one of my blog posts, I talk about a very specific way that I went about encounters, which was essentially using the storytelling collectives, like the community that I had found there, to source people to work on the project.
Mm-hmm.
They used to run a course, and I don't know if they do it anymore, but you might be able to do something similar to this, where in a month, people would write an encounter. And for the month that I participated, 80 people wrote encounters. There was like a little bit of community building and stuff. But the first team of people that I got was from me reading all 80 of those encounters, treating those as if those were job applications to come work on a set of encounters with me, and picking the top. It ended up being 6 people to come work with me. I also invited some friends. That's another discussion. But the 6 people that I reached out to, I'm like, oh God, they're not going to, say yes. 5 out of the 6 people said yes. And I know it's partially because of the project plan that I put together. It's because of the way that I phrased the email. Like I made all the money stuff and all that stuff very clear,
Mm-hmm.
so they knew. Yeah, and I also made sure that I actually read their work and I said nice things about it. And there are these small things that will somebody being enthusiastic about your work is in a context where you're talking about somebody who maybe gets that all the time because they're a super big creator, like that can end you up in the fan, sort of relationship. But for somebody who's like published their first encounter, like that's really impactful. And I got to work with some really cool people.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. Off to the next question from Celtic Denifew. Apologize for the mispronunciation there, but they ask, there was a conversation the other day in, I guess, here on the TTRPG Rising Tide Discord about project management classes or certifications. Do you think something like that would help creative folks get better at project management? Are there specific courses or skills in the PM field that would help guide smaller projects or for creative collaboration? And Lyla, we talked about this offline, so
Well,
I won't steal your thunder, but go ahead. Yeah.
okay, so I guess one thing I will say is I have not done those. To the extent that you want to learn anything from my story, that's not saying that they're, useless in any capacity. And part of it is like I didn't just burst out of, the womb. That's very gross. Knowing all this stuff, I kind of learned on the job when I was in tech organizing various things. Like I was in the Peace Corps and they had documents for how to write grants and stuff. So I'm
Hmm.
sure I picked up all this stuff, through a career, but I have never taken a course or certification about it. I love courses and certifications. Well, maybe not certifications, but I love classes. I used to make online classes, and the Storytelling Collective was my first introduction to the TTRPG space. All right, so flagrant self promotion. In sometime, hopefully early 2024, I am working on a project management course with the Storytelling Collective. My blog series is also meant to be kind of like a rough draft version of that. So, to the extent of the things that I know, like that's what I'm providing, and I have not taken. Yeah.
I think it's super inspirational, actually, Layla. I think you're underplaying it. Like, what I hear when you say that is that anybody can project manage. And with the resources that you have on your Substack and some of the other things that we talked about today, I think everybody listening to this is in a good position to get started.
Yeah, sorry, can I just like do the thing? You learn it by doing it. Don't bite off more than you can. Like start with something small, but just do it. Make sure that you're not saying, "Oh, I got to get these 5 certifications before I can like do a small project. You do not need 5 certifications before you can do a small project.
Exactly. And I see chats talking about the PMP, project management professional certificates and stuff like that. That is a big undertaking. I've never done one, but I've taken like these like crash courses and stuff like that. And honestly, I haven't seen a whole lot of overlap. I mean, there are some tools that can be gleaned out of those things, but like you're saying, Lila, don't let that be the thing that stops you from getting started.
Yeah, I have had 3 interviews for project management jobs, one of which I said no to, one of which I got into the final round of, and one of which I got. So, like, yeah, there's a whole another conversation that can be had about how to take your past experiences and then, put them in a particular light. But yeah, you do not need to take a bunch of these courses to run a month or 2 month long encounter project, which is like the first thing that I did.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. Okay, how fast do you think we could hammer these out, Lila? You think we can we have 3 left.
I will try to speak very fast.
You think we can do it? Lightning round. Lightning round.
Yeah.
So, what are the expectations for compensation from Quijam? I think we might have answered that.
Yeah, so I have a 3 blog post series on it. One of it specifically gets into stuff. If you're going to pay people by word, do at least 10 cents, I would say. There's also funky things you can do with like partially paying them up front and then also doing a royalty split.
Mhm.
But yeah, we'll link some resources in about that.
Yeah.
And if you want to be more specific about like if 10 cents a word doesn't cover whatever you're asking, like feel free to ask.
And for the 2 questions that are left, I'm going to summarize. So I hope that's okay. If I misinterpret your words, please let me know in chat. Iode Star, in summary, effectively asks how to manage teams where people don't deliver on deadlines consistently. What kind of advice would you give in that context?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, there's some amount of like understanding how you're working. You're working with freelancers. You're probably not paying, they have kids, they have jobs, they have, other stuff going on. So there's some amount of realism that you and the collaborator need to have about how fast they can actually, get stuff done. Part of the issue might be just the deadlines are way too short, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
If it seems to be more of like, I'm not going to say this well, but like I have a bad egg of somebody who's just like really not getting work done, sort of thing. So one of the preemptive things I will say for that is, and this was a thing that I was on a panel and somebody suggested it, was like, that's a good tip. If you haven't worked with somebody before, you're always going to work with somebody for the first time. And one of the things that you can do is instead of giving them some huge mission critical piece of writing that they have to do, give them something small. Give them a small cycle where you can see where they deliver on time. And if they deliver on time, then you can kind of build them up and give them larger things. The other half of that conversation is there's a lot of, oh God, I'm going to say whisper network, but I don't think that that's what I mean. But like basically among people who run projects, there's a lot of things about freelancers and kind of what their reputation is. And like, did they turn in stuff on time, which is a huge thing. By the way, if you're doing freelancing work, turn stuff in on time. Like that'll put you above that. That is better than producing a magnum opus beautiful thing. Like being reliable is extremely important. So, 2 sides to the coin. When you're thinking about hiring people, you could ask friends or folks about like who's worked well. But I actually like this other side, which is like giving people small little tests and then building folks up in the community.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like you were saying at the beginning, if you have these kinds of foundational things that talk about roles, responsibilities, and are very clear about like the ethics of how you're going to be working together, I think you can lean on that too. Okay, last question by Robin Bitbirdie. In summary, they ask where we can find a mentor.
Okay. So I think this is sort of like your mileage may vary. I still very much stick with like, I actually applied to be mentored by somebody like early on and, I didn't get it kind of thing. And at the same time, I was like running encounters and it was via a connection through there that I, found somebody. And it was also via a in-person community at Big Bad Con, which had this POC specific like program to like try to find people mentorship. Well, Twitter, and I imagine that some of these conversations on Discord, sometimes people post things. Another one of my mentors, like I actually have applied a few times for folks who are like offering mentorships, and I did get like a mentorship via that. Attending Big Bad Con had some very like specific paths to meet people to get mentored by. So the things that are within your power. First, knowing what you are trying to do, knowing the questions that you have, knowing how to basically say like, I'm looking for mentorship in like this particular, capacity. Here are the goals that I have. The thing that you don't want to have happen is, get sort of an informational interview or just like have a cool little coffee chat with somebody and not be able to express what you need or what you're trying to do, or just be completely like, I don't know if I want to do voice acting or like write a DM's, guild product, and you're talking to somebody who like is an art director. Like, so I think you're asking like, how do I get the conversation in the first place? But there is something about, being prepared for that conversation. If you are creating stuff, if you have a website, that's probably going to look a lot better for like people taking you seriously, as this is, something that you're trying to do. Yeah. So basically, Discord channels like this one that you're in, the Storytelling Collective also has one. I can see if there's some, like Drive Through RPG has one. People sometimes post things and stuff, like there's an opportunities board, and they'll sometimes post things there. Being sort of connected to folks on Twitter, that's a way that you can find like kind of just like straightforward call outs for when folks are mentoring people. I honestly do think like not waiting around, working with peer groups, meeting people who are on the same level is a way that you can find mentorship. Like, people, I think, mentored me because I was showing leadership in the space, and I have like a very strong commitment to trying to help other people and like uplift other folks. So I think that some people looked at me and they're like, we're going to help her out because the time that I invest in her is going to go out to other folks, and maybe less even than that. I was doing a lot of things proactively. I was being very proactive about stuff. I think a lot of people end up in conversations with folks who are like, man, I really want to write RPGs, and like they haven't written anything. So know what you're going to say when you chat with people. Maybe look up some stuff about informational interviews. I really love those, and I'm sure that there's like articles and stuff online. It's essentially like a way to have like a coffee with someone and ask them about what they do, and that can sometimes turn into mentorship. And I guess just like be ready to have that conversation. Like, know what you're looking for, know the questions that you have, be ready to be a good mentee.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic advice. I hope that answers everyone's questions. I'm looking at the clock and we're already over time. So unfortunately, I won't have time. I think we covered them all, but if there's any late questions, we won't be able to cover them. But yeah, I think that covers the gambit for the basics, at least with regards to project management in the TTRPG space. So thank you, Lyla, so much. This discussion has been wonderful. I could probably sit here and talk to you about this for another like 2 hours, but I won't do that because I'm sure we'll get tired of it pretty quickly. But thank you for being here. And can you let folks who are listening know where they can find you and find all of the wonderful resources you've been talking about?
Okay, so number one, actually, if you go to www.jarofeyes.com, that links to my newsletter. It's also Jar of Eyes on Substack, and you can sign up there. A lot of the stuff that I was talking about is literally just like repeating stuff from my Substack. I mentioned this a couple times, and I actually made sure to put it up on Itch. I'm Jar of Eyes on Itch too, so you can also find me there. But I made this like little zine version of the content that I've been writing. If you are interested and you don't have money to pay for it, I put it up for $5. Just like DM me. I'm happy to provide you with a copy of it. But it's a workbook, and it's meant to be printed out and kind of like ask you questions about things, and you do a little bit of journaling and get some exercises to actually like write down what are you making and how are you planning on making it. So those are the two things project management wise. I also hopefully somebody will drop a link for Jukebox, which is my own little project I am managing right now. It's my karaoke musical game coming to Kickstarter in January now. There could be some discussion about that. But also, if you sign up for my Substack, you'll get behind the scenes like game development stuff about that. And I'm seeing that the links all went up, which is really lovely. I will also say, like, I'm a pretty small creator right now, and I don't want to like totally open the floodgates, but if you're somebody who's been reading through my articles, who is like on the way to organizing a project, and you're looking for some advice or thoughts about it, or a way to be, supported in that capacity, I am, happy at least to have like a couple of exchanges with folks. So happy to advise. Another good way to like get advice from me is if you comment on my blog posts. Like, that's great because I get the interaction, but I can also answer your questions there, and then everybody will be able to see the answers to those. So yeah, super happy to support folks, and thank you for being here, everybody.
And I want to thank you, Lila, for being here because this has been a really valuable conversation. And I want to second that everybody here should definitely go check out Lila's Substack. There's all kinds of valuable resources there. And the workbook, go buy the workbook. $5, well spent, 100%. While you're at it, be sure to follow Lila on the social media platform of your choice. Lila, where can people find you, and what's your handle there?
So my handle on Twitter is Cerulean Otter, but yeah, I think the newsletter is kind of where I put out long form content there to talk about my games and stuff. So, but yeah, if you want to get tweets, which are mostly just retweeting my friends' stuff and redirecting folks to my newsletter, then I'm Cerulean Otter on Twitter, and I think I grabbed Lila on Blue Sky, but I'm also on Blue Sky.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. Folks should definitely go check out the RT discussions text chat where we've posted all the links to the Substack and to the workbook and things like that. And while you're at it, I'd also encourage you to follow the TTRPG Rising Tide on your socials of choice. That's at TTRPG Rising Tide, all one word, on Twitter, Mastodon, and I think we're on Tumblr also, and Facebook. So go find us there if you can. We'd appreciate it if you spread the word, the good word of the Rising Tide community to your friends so that they can be here for discussions like this and that they can, participate in all of the fun things that are going on in the Discord server.
Awesome.
I've been Matt at roll_play_chat on all socials, and this has been another RT Talks. My script, I need to deviate from my script for a second here because there's not going to be an RT Talks in December. We're taking the month of December off as far as these presentations go. But we're going to be kickstarting it back again in January. So hang tight. There'll be more details in the next few weeks as we sort out schedules and whatnot with guests for 2024 first RT Talks of the year. Other than that, thanks again, Lyla, for being here. Any parting words?
Thank you so much. This is an awesome community. Meet peers and make projects.
Awesome. So that's it, folks. Hope you have a good one. And remember that a rising tide lifts all boats.